Hello, Georgetta Gankars here, and today we're just going to go over a fast video about washes. We did washes and we talked about how to paint wet on wet when you're blending. We talked about oils, watercolors, and acrylics, and they're each different properties. We talked about when you're having a wash, it would be, less of your pigment and more of your other solvent. And watercolors, that would be water and less paint. And acrylics, that would be water and less paint. And in oils, you might have more of your turpentine or your Gamsol. And that's just going to make a very thin wash. And we talked about thin washes and how we would start. When I did this, in some of these demos, remember these are like 5-10 minute demos. This was an impressionist kind of demo of just to put down the strokes. And the underneath of this painting was kind of a red earth. We didn't finish it. It was just a demo to show you how to do the blending in the sky within 5 minutes. So we started with this red earth, and then we actually did the pinks, and we painted direct on the canvas, which means that instead of mixing our colors directly on the palette and then moving that color to the canvas, we were mixing directly on the canvas, and that's another way to paint. This one started out with an imprimatura, and then what we did is we did our underpainting. And underpainting is necessary to be able to run the values or to see the values, and you have to decide if you're going to have a cool underpainting or if you're going to have warm. So we had our primatura, we had our underpainting, and in this case, the underpainting happened to be red earth. You can see a little bit of that red coming through, and then we did washes on top of here, the water reflecting in the sky. The other one we did was the same here. This was a blue wash, and this was maybe about a half an hour demo where we had this blue dragged into here. You can see the light blue being moved here, but this all started out thin as a wash. Here's an example thin as a wash where the colors are a little bit thicker. This again was an oil, and you'll see how we started with the lighter areas, and then we brought it into the darker umber brown, and we did blending and shading, and that was a monochromatic canvas. And then here again, we started this at the park, or this one where we just started, where it's like a 2-minute demo, just how to do the washes. So you can see they're very thin, they're kind of translucent. With watercolors, you're working with washes anyway. So what I wanted to show you besides the wash, and everybody knows that when you have a wash, you would use your largest brush. If it's a watercolor, it's a mop. If it's acrylics or oils, you can use a hake if you want. You can kind of just dip it off on your rag, pick up your water, and I'll just show you this fast. And you just want to saturate, the edge of the brush. I have a little bit of paint there, and we practice doing these, strokes across. And if we put more paint, remember when we did the water, I showed you how you can load up your brush like I did, where the most of the paint is in the middle. So you're separating, say this was the background of the canvas and you have that wash instantaneously, then you have the middle ground here, and then you have the foreground. And we can pull that color out, and what we do is we change the brush. We don't go across, now we kind of go sideways, and we can bring out that color. So most of the time, if I want to cover my canvas and I have this horizon line going through, I can do this. And of course, you're doing it on a larger scale, and you're able to blend it. And it's pretty easy. It doesn't take a long time to do the wash. You can add a darker color. I ask students to practice their washes on watercolor paper. It's really good. If you don't want to do that, you can use an old recycled canvas and do the same. Okay, so just practice doing these light washes. In other words, and you can have something underneath. I'm going to pull out the color. This is why I have this here on purpose, so you can see what I'm doing. And I can pull out that green. It's really easy to do. So if you had a watercolor, right, you had the marks down before, you can just pull out that color with your mop, or if you had a larger brush, a hake. With acrylics, it will dry. With oils, you can use a little bit of terp, and if you're building it up, you can also use some linseed. Now, I just want to go into the next thing because I did a whole wash video for you. I want to go into the next thing, which is how to use your brushes. So we talked in detail about the fan brush. It's shaped like a fan. There's many different types. This one happens to be separated here because it was wet. I usually reshape my brushes. And you can paint dry on dry, which is going to give it more texture, or you can paint wet, where you're putting the brush in the water, wiping it off on the rag, and picking up a color. So I just want to show you, when I do foliage, or I want to do leaves, what I do is I kind of dip my brush in my green paint, and I just saturate the edges. And then what I'll do is I'll do another color on the other side. So I have green on this side. Then I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to put yellow on this side. Right, so I have green on one side, yellow on the other side. And I'll show you something. If I pull it down, do you see how I get these strokes? Right, and I can keep building up on them. I can just pick up some green. So I really like the fan brush when I want to build up a lot of texture, or maybe if I was doing leaves or grass, and I can just go in with those strokes and I can just keep building them up. I can also use the side of the brush, you know, instead of just going down like that. I can do these up and down kind of strokes, which would take a really long time if I wanted to do it with a rigger brush or a liner. And I can just pick up different colors, and I've got that yellow. And you see how I get all of that in 2 minutes? I can just kind of do that. Okay, so you can do that with oils or watercolors with the fan brush, and it works really well. For example, you know, if you wanted to, you see my other canvas, I had an example. When we were starting on our foliage here, you see these little strokes coming up. That works well with the fan brush. So again, really recommend doing it. Otherwise, you're going to have to use a very thin brush, right? And you're going to have to do more strokes. So that fan brush works with that. You could still do it with this brush. You could also do it with a brush that comes to a square. We call it a flat. This is about a number 8. It happens to be hog hair. You don't have to use that, but if you want a rougher texture, this will work well. If you want it like this, again, and you don't have to dip it in the water. If you want the transition to be, the strokes to be, you know, a lot bolder. If you want them to be a little bit more subtle, with the watercolors, you can dip your brush in the water, wipe it off on a rag so it's not dripping, and then you can pick up the paint and do the stroke. The same with acrylics. You would dip it in the water, wipe it off on your rag, pick up the color, and do the stroke. If you wanted them to be a lot stronger and more bolder and thicker, you could just use the brush with no water on it whatsoever, and do not saturate the brush. With oils, you know, you could have your canvas where you kind of did the rub in, where you have your you know, your turp rubbed into the canvas, or if you're just picking up the paint directly, or you could pick up equal amounts of your Gamsol and your linseed and kind of do that. Or you could just, as you're working from fat to lean and the paint is getting thicker, you can just pick up the paint. So I'll show you what I mean. So I have my brush, and now I'm just going to pick up some yellow, and now I'm picking up green. So I got green on one side, yellow on the other, and it's a different type of stroke because these strokes are going to be a lot thicker. And you kind of get this, and they come out like soft, and you kind of get that kind of texture. And this is because I'm doing it with a thicker brush. So if you wanted the same stroke kind of pattern, you could use a thicker brush and the strokes would be a lot wider. If you didn't want that, you could use another brush that's a flat brush. But make sure that the tip is very thin. So I'm going to show you a better brush. Here's a brush. And this is synthetic, but do you see how thin the tip is? So let's do it again. I'm going to pick up some green here, and I'm going to pick up some yellow at the same time. And I'll show you when I drag these strokes. And I can go back from yellow to green to yellow to green. And these are larger strokes, obviously. They're thicker. But try them, because you get different types of methods of doing the grass with these different types of brushes, and utilizing the side of your brush and pulling it down You know, sometimes students have trouble doing one stroke. Do you see how you can blend the colors of the grass within that one stroke? You don't have to do like a yellow and then blend a green. You can have that stroke blended together in one stroke. And it helps you go a little bit faster. My brush has not been cleaned. I just picked up some brown here. And what I'm going to do is I'll put that on top so you can see. And now I have this layering. It's brown. I have this brown going on. Okay, so there's lots of different ways, and you can come back and don't press hard, and you can keep layering the colors, and it works really well. You know, you can go back to your yellow, and you can see how thickly you can build that up with those strokes. Okay, and if you go fast, you know, and again, my brush has not been cleaned. It's on here. So this is different. Again, it's with a synthetic brush, and this is kind of dry. I didn't dip it in the water. If I dipped it in the water, I'll show you, it would be a little bit more translucent. So we get more of this wash kind of feel. See how much lighter it is when I am dipping it into my water. Okay, it's like a watercolor here. And we can still do the layerings, you know, we just have them lighter as a wash. Okay, so again, if you don't have a synthetic brush, you don't need one. You can use a natural hair brush. It doesn't matter, but make sure that you're using it up and down again. Again, you can use the fan brush, which we use, which looks like this. Make sure the fan brush is kind of thin. The fan brush is cool too because I have a lot of water in it, and I'll show you. And I can kind of do, now that I have it loose, I can make these kind of loose strokes with it. You know, and again, just taking the water out. So it has a lot of different kind of methods. The other thing that you can do is, we'll do it up here, is if you have a brush that is kind of, again, this, and I don't pay attention to the numbers because it depends on the manufacturer. This is a number 10. It's a natural hair brush. See, it's a little bit thick here. I can pick up my white, and I'll show you. I picked up white on the tip, and now I'm just going to dab it here. And I can kind of practice doing these kind of clouds. You know, when you're doing clouds, you should look at the sky because all different types of clouds are different. You know, some of them are very, you know, transparent. So if you want a thicker cloud, you can go back with more white, you know, on it and press harder. And I did a whole video on clouds. You know, those are your fast kind of clouds here. But you don't want to, you know, just a round circle there or something like that. And you can also pick up shadows in clouds. You know, you can pick up a little bit of blue in there. Let's pick up a little bit of blue where you can blend it. You can make that cloud, as you can see, come through. And it's a little bit more realistic because you do see spaces sometimes between clouds. So I did a whole video on the scientific names of the clouds and how to make them. But this is something that you could practice. You know, if you want more white, you could go back with more white on certain areas. I talked about how you could take a dry brush with no paint and go and pull those clouds out and blend them and make them very soft on the edges. So now we're making this big puffy white cloud, and I'll show you it's changing. Okay, so there's different ways that we can work with the brushes when we're doing it, wet on wet. If you're doing a watercolor, I usually have students mask it out, and I showed you how to do that with wax resist or with your masking fluid. Now, the last thing I want to show you is the press and release method. So I'm going to get another brush. Again, same kind of brush, flat brush, but it's a little thick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up some green and I'm going to put it here. Let's put it here so you can see it really well. And I'm going to press, but I'm going to leave spaces. Do you see these spaces in between? Okay, so I'm pressing and I'm leaving these spaces. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here with another color, maybe like a yellow,